Well, the battle for Tripoli has been raging for quite a few days, but there's still no clear winner at this point. If you look at the battle lines, neither side seems to have much momentum, and neither of the sides seem to be getting too tired as far as battle fatigue goes. It seems as though there's enough fighters to keep this battle going for the foreseeable future. Now, we don't have a lot of good information on what's going on the ground right now, but from what best I can tell, the way that the forces break down is that on one side you have the Government of National Accord, which is sort of a hodgepodge interim government recognized by the UN, and they are backed by a series of militias who want the sort of the GNA reconciliation process of forming a new government in Libya to be carried out, and sort of they back the UN plan. There does not seem to be any military for this government. They just rely on the support of independent militias. Now, this is very important because when you have a band of ragtag militias, while they may be independently, each soldier may be rather passionate if they voluntarily joined this militia, but it is very hard to keep control of them, and it's very hard to actually wage a conventional military battle without any sort of strong centralized command structure. So what you end up getting is a bunch of small units acting independently of one another, just trying to inflict damage on the enemy where they can. Now, I'd have to imagine by this point they've established some sort of line of command or chain of command within the GNA network of militias, but again, since it is not a formal military, I don't think that their command is going to be nearly as strong as what you would see in the case of the Libyan National Army, which is what they're going up against. The LNA, led by General Khalifa Haftar, apparently, from what I understand, came out of Gaddafi's Libya and was a part of his army. So while I'm sure they've picked up plenty of new recruits over the last 8 years or so, they at least had a history of a good, disciplined command structure, which means that General Haftar is actually able to command it as an army. Not to mention that the rest of the officer corps has battlefield experience from trying to fight not only in Benghazi but throughout most of Libya, taking out groups like ISIS and other militias, whereas none of the militias in the GNA's side of the battle have any experience winning against a disciplined and formal army. So my prediction is that the militias will not be able to actually hold the territory in Tripoli, and that they will fall eventually. This would be quite similar to what's happened with U.S. wars in the Middle East when they try and attack insurgents that are holding territory. Insurgents and militias are not very good at holding territory. What they're good at is waging insurgencies. What that means is that when Tripoli eventually falls and Haftar tries to unify Libya under his rule, he could face the threat of these militias coming back and waging a sort of a guerrilla war against him in Tripoli. And that's something that formal armies are not very good at handling. Guerrilla warfare really is the domain of the militia, and the military, formal militaries like the Libyan National Army, are really good for large-scale battles between opposing sides, like what we're witnessing right now in Tripoli. But if the U.S. Army's experience in Iraq and Afghanistan is any indication, the Libyan National Army will not perform too well against a insurgency led by perhaps former GNA militiamen. However, considering the lack of ideological passion on either side, I can't see that the militiamen currently fighting would, for the most part, stage an insurgency against Haftar were he to be victorious. I mean, we're even hearing reports of different militias changing sides, going back and forth, siding with either Haftar or the GNA. So it would seem for the most part that these guys are pretty unprincipled. I think the goal of most of these guys is probably just to stay alive and to end up on the winning side so that you don't get purged by whoever the new leader is. The only ones I could see waging a real insurgency would be the Islamist factions, who are not particularly favored by either side, but considering that they are a minority within these different militia groups, I don't see that they will necessarily be the biggest problem. So ultimately, I think that the militiamen will accept defeat in the end, and Haftar will be able to unify the country under his rule and become the new dictator. Now, what I don't know is what this means for Libya after. All we really know about Haftar is that he's not an Islamist. So does that mean that he's like General al-Sisi in Egypt, and he's just going to run kind of a repressive military secular regime? Or is he perhaps more like his old boss, Muammar Gaddafi, who with his Pan-African sympathies and rather strange ideology? If I had to guess, I would seem to me that Haftar is just a typical military tin pot, which is frankly better than what Libya's had in the last few years. So they certainly could be doing worse, but there's not much cause for joy. He's not particularly great or anything. Now, the bright spot is, the only real bright spot of the terrible failed NATO regime change operation in Libya is that they get to use the cool old flag of the Kingdom of Libya, which I have to say is one of my favorite flags in use today. Actually, it might be my favorite flag of any country currently in existence. Green, black, and red are just a really cool combination. So on that note, I will close, and I'd like to thank you all for tuning in for as long as you did. And if you got anything of value from this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and subscribing. But don't forget to hit the bell, because I do upload every day, and I'd hate to have you miss one, because I'll be back here tomorrow, and I hope to see you as well.